Okay, I think we should start. I've started the recording as well so that I can upload this material on Moodle and you will be able to access this. So today's topic is national output, and we start with the circular flow diagram, the first two exercises. So generally, the first question asks you about the injections into the circular flow diagram and withdrawals. In the first exercise, you need to list them, and in the second exercise, you'll need to plot them on a diagram. So you'll need to mark the correct places. You'll need to just label the direction of these flows. And the whole material, both questions, are based on what we have covered in the lecture, on this particular diagram. So let's recall what exactly it means, what I've covered previously. So this diagram actually might look quite complex, but in fact it's not when you see the video. Have you seen this video? Have you seen me explaining this diagram? Yeah. Generally, when you start drawing it from the beginning, it's not that difficult. And the whole idea of the circular flow is that there are several sectors in the economy which interact with each other in different ways. So there are several sectors in the economy. The first sector is households. We all live in households, and what is important is that all resources belong to us, to households, all factors of production, which includes labor, capital, land, and entrepreneurship. Apart from this, there is another big sector in the economy, which is firms. Firms produce different goods and services, and households and firms interact via two markets. The first market is the output market, where goods and services are purchased and sold, top of the diagram. And apart from this, they also interact via inputs markets. In other words, where factors of production are sold and purchased. So how exactly the circular flow diagram works? Households sell their resources, they own all resources, and they sell them in input markets. For example, workers sell their labor services. Capital owners lend their capital in order to earn interest on it. Landlords provide rental premises for everyone who wants to rent them out in return for rent, and so on. And entrepreneurs, businessmen, use their intellectual abilities, their skills, in order to create businesses and make a profit from this. So all these factors of production are sold in input markets, and this is where resources are purchased. So firms purchase these resources, which is shown by this black arrow. And then firms use these resources, transform them, process them, and convert them into valuable goods and services. They produce output, which is shown by this arrow. And they supply this output, their goods and services, to the output markets, where they are sold to the households. So households purchase these goods on goods markets. This completes the first flow, the first direction of the flow of goods throughout the economy, shown in black arrows. However, there is a second flow throughout the same chain, via money, the circular flow of money through the economy, and this is shown in green. So when households purchase their goods and services, they pay for them. They pay for them with money, and this flow of money represents a revenue for companies. Companies sell products, consumers purchase for them, pay for them, and firms use this as the revenue. So they receive revenue, and then they will be able to distribute this revenue to pay for their supplies. So they will pay to their suppliers, they will pay for resources, they will pay to their staff, to raw material suppliers, they will pay their bank charges, they will pay their rents, etc. And whatever is left will be distributed as profit to the business owners, to the shareholders, to businessmen who created this particular enterprise. So as a result, households will receive rewards in return for their services they've provided, in return for their inputs. So workers will receive wages, capital owners will receive interest on the capital they've provided, on the capital they've lent, landlords will receive rent, and entrepreneurs will get profit. So this completes our second flow throughout our economy. And we'll stay here. I will not add anything else just yet, because the rest of the diagram refers to the aggregate demand and measuring GDP. This is what you don't need just yet. And now, based on this, let's have a look at the first question, which asks you about the injections and withdrawals. So generally, injections is something which will add to the circular flow. So what adds to the circular flow diagram? In other words, these are things, these are flows which will increase the amount of goods and money circulating in the economy. And this will include investment, government expenditure, and exports. Three types of injections in the economy. The more of those we have, the bigger will be the size of the economic pie which we produce. I'm sorry, could you please pull your mask up slightly? Thank you very much. Thank you, to ensure that it covers your nose and mouth completely. Why is that? Because the more we invest, the more companies will be able to produce, the higher will be the capital amount they have, there will be higher production potential of the economy if we invest more. In other words, firms will be able to produce more when there is lots of investments in the economy. Same with government expenditure. Government expenditure represents an additional purchaser of the goods which we are able to produce. The more government is willing to purchase, the higher will be demand for our products, the more companies will be able to produce, the more income they will be able to pay to workers, and so on. This increases the amount of money and goods circulating in the economy. This provides a boost to aggregate demand and national output. And exports. Exports is what we sell to foreigners. Again, it's a part of our aggregate demand. If you recall the aggregate demand formula, this is the most important formula in macroeconomics, and you need to remember it. It's not about just the formula itself, it's the meaning of the formula which you need to understand. In the actual exam, you will be able to write it down, you will be able to copy it from your notes, but unless you understand the formula, you will struggle understanding the rest of the module, macroeconomics part of the module. But in fact, this formula is very simple. It simply tells you that there are different components to aggregate demand, and this is what was shown in our circular flow diagram. There are different sectors of the economy which will purchase our goods. So this will include consumption, investment, government expenditure, and net exports. These are four components of aggregate demand. Consumers purchase part of the product which we produce, then companies will buy some of it. Investment represents purchases of capital goods by firms for investment purposes. Some companies produce certain, for example, machinery or equipment, and other companies are buying this machinery as their capital in order to produce something else. So this adds to the aggregate demand. Government is one of the components of aggregate demand. The higher the government expenditure, the higher aggregate demand will be. And the same with investment. The higher the amount of investment, the higher aggregate demand will be, which will provide a boost to national output. And exports is one of the components which enters here, net exports. Net exports is simply the difference between exports and imports. In other words, it's the difference between what we sell to foreigners and what we buy of them. The more we sell, the more foreigners purchase of us, the more popular our products are in international markets, the higher is aggregate demand for our products. So the higher the level of exports, the higher net exports will be, which will increase aggregate demand. So basically, injections are things which will increase components of aggregate demand and will increase overall aggregate demand and will increase national output in the economy. And withdrawals are actually the opposite thing. Withdrawals are leakages from our circular flow. These are things which will reduce the amount of goods and money circulating in the economy. And generally, this includes savings, taxes, and imports. So these are the opposite to injections. Why savings will reduce the total production level, total size of our circular flow. This is because the more people save, the less they consume. So generally, all income which consumers receive is split into two parts, consumption and savings. Consumption and savings, C and S in macroeconomics. So all income, national income, total output is actually total income which consumers will receive. And we either consume or save. So the more we save, the less we consume. In other words, the higher the savings, the lower consumption will be, which will reduce aggregate demand. So strictly speaking, it's not really good for the economy in the short term to have high savings rate, because basically it reduces aggregate demand. Unfortunately, there is a paradox here, because when we have a low savings rate, in the long run, it will undermine our production potential. It's quite good to have high consumption level in the short run. It will provide a boost to our aggregate demand. But in the long run, if we don't save sufficiently, there will be not enough funds for investment purposes. So it's a paradox of savings, and it's described in your textbook. And we need to find a balance between short run and long-term objectives of the economy. You cannot have both. You cannot have both high savings rate to ensure your future production potential and high consumption levels at the same time. Taxes. Taxes is the opposite to government expenditure, strictly speaking. The higher the taxes, the lower disposable income will be. Lower disposable income of consumers. What is disposable income? Disposable income is the difference between actual income received and taxes paid. So, for example, you've earned £1,000, but government has taken away 200 in the form of national insurance and income tax. The higher the tax rate, the less money you will actually have in your pocket to spend. So, the higher the tax rate, the lower disposable income, the lower consumption level will be, which will reduce aggregate demand. Because when taxes are high, you have less money to spend, consumption level will be low, which will reduce one of the components of aggregate demand. So taxes is the leakage. It's something, it's amount of money which is removed from the circle of flow. It's a leakage, it's a withdrawal. And imports in the same way will reduce aggregate demand, because it will reduce net exports. So exports minus imports, this is our component of aggregate demand, the difference between exports and imports. When imports go up, it implies that net exports will drop, which will again reduce aggregate demand. So injections is what adds to circle of flow. So these are the things which will increase aggregate demand. And withdrawals are things which what reduces aggregate demand and make it lower. Three of which: investment, government expenditure, and exports. These are injections or additions to the circle of flow, and savings, taxes, and imports are withdrawals or leakages. And based on this, you've been asked to label the diagram below. So you had to position 8 items. And generally, this is exactly what we have in a slightly different format. We have households and we have firms which interact with each other. And this is what we have. Companies pay to households in the form of factor payments. So payments for factors of production. This is actually national income. Factor payments represents national income. National income. And this includes all income received by households, wages, interest on capital which you've provided. When you save, you generate some interest. And banks, you become a capital owners. You provide your capital to whoever wants to borrow it. Banks serve as middlemen. They channel capital from savers to borrowers, and they will pay you interest on your savings, on your capital. And you receive this as a reward for your factors of production. And landlords will receive rent, and entrepreneurs will receive profit. So these are all forms of national income paid by companies to households in one form or another. And consumers consume these products, they buy products from firms, and they actually spend some amount on consumption. So consumption will be here. Right, and apart from this, we also have some leakages and some injections to the circle of flow. So these red arrows show some leakages, which includes exports, taxes, and savings. And green arrows show obviously injections, investment, government expenditure, and exports. So generally, these two exercises are related to each other. In the first exercise, you simply list them, and in the second exercise, you combine them in one diagram. So this is what you need to know about the circle of flow diagram. And now I want you to focus on exercises 3 and 4, which are also related to each other. And here we start thinking about factors or events which will change national income. Moreover, we will discuss changes in the short run and in the long run, events which will affect actual output and potential economic growth. So basically, this should be quite easy, and don't be discouraged even if you haven't checked the lecture just yet. Try to think for yourself how it would work. So try to do these exercises 3 and 4.